Okay, so in this video, I want to show a really powerful technique that I use for testing, which also shows the power of the services that I've been using here. So let's take a look at this. So I got this service we call Mitmproxy that I'm working on. I just finished deploying it. So I got this new version 7.0. This version actually has a little bit of a big bug where it processes the request, takes the URL and goes and get it. But actually, we also receive the HTML from the Mitmproxy. So we should be using that. So in fact, what we should be using is this service here, which is this HTML service, which I have another set of videos that explain the UI of it and how everything works. And actually, I can show you here quickly. And this service fundamentally just, is able to take the HTML that we have here and then basically process it and then returns on the other side and transforms it here where you can manipulate it. So, you see the other video to see how everything works here. But fundamentally, it's about having all these sort of hashes workflows so that we can replace this, right? So that's all cool, right? So the two other services that we use a cache service, which is this one here, which is ridiculously powerful. And by the way, everything here is done using CI. You can see I deploy and push. And both of these go to FastAPI, which is important here, right? There you go. They go both to FastAPI, which basically means I can access the service also from a Python package. So here's the first bit, right? So the first bit is I use Claude to write a lot of the tests because Claude does a really good job. And actually Claude in this case used mocks and it was actually quite clever, right? So we basically adding this new service client, which is basically the one that connects to the HTTP. So this is the client that calls this service, this API service that you can see here, right? So HTML service client, right? So cool. There's a transformation, makes the request, and then transforms the response in a whole bunch of things. So basically, kind of Claude did this, which is quite good, and I always curate the tests and improve it a bit, but fundamentally using mocks and patches, which I never like, right? Because this thing is actually doing the request post, is actually pretty alright, mocks the response, and it was kind of okay, right? So at this level, I was like, okay, I can live with this, right? So you could see basically mocks the request, right? And then you can control it and check. I never liked this because I much prefer to execute a lot more stuff, but this was kind of okay. The problem is I have another transformation service, which is here, and this is where these are the tests that I got from Claude, right? Which, by the way, I'm going to delete as soon as I finish this video. And what happens when I run this, I got a test for my type safety stuff, right? And this is never good news, right? So, or it's really good news because it's a bug they need to fix. But he says, hey, on this transformation service, you receive an invalid type. So let's just take a quick look here. So that means that on this object here, and you can actually see the type safe kind of objects in place. So you can see the invalid type for attribute HTML service client, which is this guy here, because we expected to receive a type of this, but we got a mock on it. Now, the thing about this is the whole point of type safety, right? So in a way, the mock abuses the type safety of Python because he assigns a mock here, which kind of what, you can actually see is exactly what's doing here, right? Is actually, the test is actually mocking this stuff here, which is basically, there you go, right? And also the next object too, right? But this was like one of those where I either start to fix this, and I even thought about adding mock support to type safe, but it doesn't feel good. That's the whole point of using type safety, right? So in this case, what I did was actually something better, which was I'm actually going to use the live services from here. And what happens is, let's take a look at it on a simpler example. So this is that previous example I showed you. You can see it runs nicely, right? But again, it's mocking everything. What is cool about it is look at this second example, right? Which I can run here. Also runs a bit, slower, okay, 53 milliseconds versus 1. But the point of this service, which is much better, is if you look at this setup classes here, what we actually have is we use this get HTML service. And this is a helper class that I created that fundamentally, and this is really cool, right? Fundamentally is going to take the HTML service FastAPI. This is actually the code of the service itself. So this is the service which actually being imported as a dependency that you can actually, if you follow this is literally the FastAPI, right? This is literally the FastAPI object that gets created. So this is the object that the service that fires up here actually uses, right? So what's really cool is I'm able to create very quickly. I set up, and I have this FastAPI service class that I've already created. And what this does is basically allows you to very quickly start and stop a FastAPI server. So just to walk you through what's happening is in this couple lines of code here, with this, I set it up, and as soon as I call start, I have a local FastAPI server of my HTML service. How freaking cool is that, right? And that means that, and I stop it here, right? And that means that now when I make my call, so the equivalent of this guy here that has the mocks, I can now call directly the service. So this is just a bunch of tests, but this is where it gets interesting, right? So this service here, this call here, so this is the HTML round trip, for example. So this call here to client transform HTML is actually going to make a call to the actual server. So you basically see this base URL, which is basically what we overrode here at the top. So we basically configured that base URL to actually be my local temporary FastAPI server that is running. So what's cool about this is in this test that you see here that I execute, so if you go here, what actually happens is I'm actually running the code from my Mitmproxy that is actually calling a HTML service server that is actually alive on the local test environment, and that boot up in a couple of milliseconds, about 150 milliseconds, and literally I'm testing like a live thing. And my code, which is in this case what I'm coding on a manual proxy, has no idea that it's talking to this temporary server. But it's really cool because it's actually invoking the exact code. So this has exact behavior that will happen on the server, right? So you can see, so now I have a bunch of other tests. So here's another test, right? So this test is going to call the transform URL, which does this. And another thing I do, can you see I put bug there and I put bug because actually this is actually, there's a bug in this workflow. So he's actually returning the wrong one. I capture this. So I remember and come back. This is actually correct. So you can see here XXS, basically this is the equivalent of replacing all the bits with just X's. But the coolest thing is that you can see here, like this test now, which runs in 49 milliseconds, is executing and doing all these tests on top of a live HTML server. So this was cool, but this was the simpler one. What about this one that actually uses both the cache and the service? So what we can do now here, let me show you that. So now this here has to do the two things. So this has to start the HTML service, has to start the cache service, which is this one here, right? And then starts both, and then actually this is configured to some you can see that I configured the HTML and the cache service based URLs. So this is actually another really helper class I do, where this sets temporary environment variables and then restores it here just in case they've been set up for other tests or other things. So, and then that's it. So, and then actually on this one, I add this helper method just to tell us how long it starts. So if I just do a quick test, what we can see that the too fast API starts in about 503 milliseconds. And actually that's because I'm on battery. You know, if I if I plug my power, it probably goes down to 300. But you know, it's still acceptable, right? But just to be clear, like, so if you look here, this test here is really cool because this test is actually making 2 GET requests to a base URL in, you know, with just the health service. So this info.health is this API that we got here. There you go, info.help health. There you go. So and now basically calling this endpoint. That's just the cold start of Lambers. There you go. So we're calling that. So we are basically calling this, but not on the cache server. Actually locally on our computer. In fact, if I just go here and I just go and I print it out, you get to see that basically that's going to be a local random port there, right? So you could see there's my local server 56 something, and now it's going to be 82888, right? 28222, right? So there you go, right? Pretty cool, right? So then now I can do the same thing. So now this is a more complex workflow. This workflow actually has caches. It has all sorts of stuff. So for example, here we can run a test where I do first the transformation, then I go and get it, and you can see the response that I get from the actual cache. So this is already, if you think, it's already a much more complex, you know, process, right? So it actually uses the other one, but this is, you can actually see that this gets a transform HTML here. So you can see this is the hashes. It tells what transformation mode, what's the content type, did we had a cache sheet or not, and then there's more, right? And I really like this sort of, again, this dot object thing because it gives me, instead of using dot JSON to compare JSON objects, I'm actually using these bits. And all of these are sort of strongly typed transformations of type safe classes, right? And even on stuff like this, on complex HTML, I also quite like to review it here, right? So you can actually see here, for example, there's the title, there's home, about, paragraph with strong, bold, and italic. So you can actually see what's happening here. Look, there's the hash for home, there's the hash for about, there's the hash for the title, for paragraph with strong, bold, and italic, right? There is a thing, right? And even in this case where we're actually making sure we have the multiple types of transformations, I can actually check this. And this is really good, easy to read. Again, mark that as a bug to fix later. And then, but the object is really powerful, right? But the point here is all these tests that are running here, which basically run, let me just run all of them. So this guy takes about a second. Can be a bit optimized, but it's kind of decent, okay, right? And you could see that the thing started in 516 milliseconds, and then all my tests here run in a second. Actually, this usually runs in about 500 milliseconds. There you go. So that's all these tests that are done, and this is already invoking a ridiculous amount of code, right? Not crazy amount of code, but it's more of an integration test than a unit test, but because I can run everything locally, starts and including on my CI pipeline, which is, by the way, what you have here, right? This is basically those tests. In fact, I can check, right, that particular test here, let's say test transformation service, is actually executed here, right? There we go, right? There's my tests, all nice and passing. I can actually see the performance here, and there you go, right? So I don't think the guy did it. That's just the coverage. All right, cool. So yeah, so you can see that it's ridiculously powerful. The fact that all my tests, I actually start in 2 web servers, right, and then run the tests. So this gives me a huge amount of confidence that this is working exactly how it's supposed to work, and also gives me a huge amount of confidence to making changes in the code base. And this is coming back to this service.